The Philippines is a resource-rich country facing an energy dilemma. Electricity is more costly than ever, and supply shortages are becoming more frequent. To address this issue, there must be an overhaul of the fossil fuel-dependent energy mix and a pivot toward more sustainable and environmentally friendly energy solutions. Renewable energy sources such as solar, geothermal, and wind currently account for just below 30% of the country's energy mix. But they cannot yet sustainably shoulder the bulk of the country's energy needs. This is where green hydrogen may offer an efficient and climate-friendly addition to the Philippines' energy mix. But there's still much to learn about green hydrogen and fuel cell technology. In today's podcast, we'll be exploring the benefits and possible applications of this technology here in the Philippines. My name is Jana Everett, and I'm the Special Projects Director here at the German-Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And with me today are two green hydrogen experts. I'm excited to welcome Mr. Mark Schiels, Vice President for Energy Systems at the German technology company H2 Core Systems, and Mr. Robert Köhn, a renewable energy consultant based here in the Philippines. Mark and Robert, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Hello, Kubustaka.
Yeah, hello. It's nice to join this podcast.
Thank you, gentlemen. So let's dive right in. I already mentioned earlier that the Philippines' energy mix is pretty much fossil fuel dependent. So Robert, could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes, in the Philippines, the dependency on coal is still very heavy since a lot of electric power plants are coal-fired. If we look at the power generation mix, we have approximately 60% coal and crude oil, 20% gas, and around 20% comes from renewable energies at the moment.
Speaking of renewable energy sources, the Philippine government has committed to increase the use of renewable energy to 35% by 2030. At the current transition pace, would you say that this is a realistic goal, Robert?
Yeah, I think this is a realistic and it's very ambitious goal. The Philippine government having its policies, its programs in place. We have at the moment registered around 900 projects. If we split it in solar, we have 274 projects with around 13 gigawatt. Presently installed in solar, it's about 1.1 gigawatt. If we look at the hydro sector, we have 416 projects with around 11 gigawatt, which are in the row for development. We have installed hydro 1.1 gigawatt. If we look at wind, we also have 76 projects with a potential of around 3.5 gigawatt. Now installed wind is around 500 or 600 megawatt. We have geothermal. We have some projects in the pipeline of around 700 or maybe 900 megawatt. Now installed is 2 gigawatt. We have also biomass projects, and we have, of course, also the new ocean power projects. So there is a large pipeline of 900 projects which are waiting for investment and for development and implementation.
Well, that does sound quite positive actually for the Philippines in its push towards more renewables. Maybe can you say something also about the coal moratorium that was signed in 2020 here in the Philippines?
The aim for 2030 is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 75%. But this goal is also a little bit split. They are also talking about 2.7% of the 75% will be unconditional, and the rest is conditional. It means foreign investment and foreign technology is needed for this. I think there is a lot of space for investment and for a lot of business in the industry of renewable energies here in the Philippines.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I was just about to say that is actually also a good outlook for foreign investment to come in the push for renewable energy sources. But still, going back on the reliance of coal, you did mention the technology that is required to harness and distribute this green power. This brings us to the topic of hydrogen. So, Mark, why don't you enlighten us on what makes hydrogen different from other renewable energy sources?
So hydrogen is always been considered the optimum and ideal alternative energy source to fossil fuels. Quite simply, hydrogen exists all around us. It's the most abundant element in the universe. It already exists in gas, coal, wood, but more importantly, it exists in water. When hydrogen is combined with oxygen, water is its natural form. So historically, to get that hydrogen, it's normally been done by extracting it from fossil fuels. But technology has sort of advanced quite a level now where it's very viable to extract hydrogen from water, particularly if I have access to relatively low-cost energy, such as available from renewables. So the process of extracting hydrogen from water is called electrolysis, and the principle is based around applying an electric current to drive a chemical reaction which separates the oxygen and the hydrogen. And the device to produce that is referred to as an electrolyzer. Electrolysis as an actual process has been around for a long time. I think it was developed around the 1800s, but historically it's been inefficient and expensive, particularly because historically you needed a lot of energy to start the electrolysis process. Also, the process to produce hydrogen resulted in the hydrogen coming out at low pressure, so you needed to run the process for a long time to produce a meaningful amount of hydrogen. The technology that we've started to introduce to the Philippines from our company is based on a very different design of electrolyzer. It's ideally suited to work with an energy source that comes from renewables, i.e. that are unpredictable and can vary. This technology is currently being manufactured in Germany, and it opens the door for lots of opportunity to produce hydrogen as a fuel and to store it locally where it's actually needed.
Mark, how widespread is hydrogen use in major industries around the world? You talked about the benefits of it. Where is it currently already being used in that form?
The global production of hydrogen last year was around 70 million metric tons. This is for pure hydrogen, and this is primarily used in the oil refining industry and in the production of fertilizers such as ammonia. In addition to that 70 million, there's another 45 million metric tons of hydrogen used where it's combined with other gases for the production of fuel and feedstock. In industry, hydrogen is mainly used for the production of methanol, which is used in the manufacturing of a whole range of products, and also in the production and manufacturing of steel. Most hydrogen used today is produced from fossil fuels. So I guess hydrogen is as clean as its energy input.
Mark, I'm glad that you point that out, because one of the things that I found out when I was researching the topic is that there is a color spectrum to identify the source, as you just mentioned, of the energy that had been used to generate the hydrogen. Could you just explain the difference between, let's say, green hydrogen and other types?
Basically, green hydrogen is hydrogen that its process of producing it involves no carbon. It's completely carbon free. Typically, the only way you can get green hydrogen is by water electrolysis, where the power source comes from renewable, non-fossil fuel sources. The second, I guess, color, and as I mentioned before, this is the most common form of hydrogen used at the moment, is called brown hydrogen. Brown hydrogen is produced from fossil fuel sources such as gas or coal. The process of producing brown hydrogen releases carbon into the atmosphere. In a way to make brown hydrogen a little bit cleaner, there are a number of endeavors to capture that carbon. And if that is successfully done, that hydrogen can be called blue hydrogen. Technically, it's clean, but it's actually not green because this carbon that you have captured, you got to do something with it. Other than releasing it into the atmosphere, you would have to basically store it somewhere.
So basically, as you said, Mark, only green hydrogen is carbon neutral and therefore a good alternative to burning fossil fuels. If that is also great, why don't we all generate and use green hydrogen already? I guess there are some challenges.
I guess the first challenge has been the optimization already of the oil and gas industries. Oil and gas has been around for a long time. Production, infrastructure, distribution is already in place, and that has achieved a certain cost point. If you take a new technology and you need to figure out potentially new distribution and new logistics for that, it will always make the new technology appear to be more expensive or certainly more challenging. Yeah. And I guess one aspect of hydrogen that makes it a little bit more difficult, not impossible, but requires some thought, is that hydrogen is typically being expensive to produce. That I think has dramatically changed now with the availability of renewable ways of generating electricity, particularly now that solar PV is literally cents in the watts cost. Solar is a very low cost way to get that energy needed to cause the production process. But hydrogen also has potential difficulties in terms of storage and transportation. There are a variety of different approaches to addressing the storage and transport. And I think the most exciting one for the Philippine market is to use renewables to produce hydrogen on the site where they're actually needed. For example, if I had a small village, I could have a PV set up producing hydrogen, which can then be used to provide electricity for that village. And that's an awful lot easier than having a large hydrogen production facility in a faraway place and then having to transport that hydrogen to that site where it's actually needed.
Do you think that because of the penetration of renewable energy sources in various countries, that there will be a difference for hydrogen this time? You mentioned it's been around for 150 years, but still we do not see a broad application in places like you just mentioned, like off-grid areas. Do you think there will be a different approach this time?
I guess the question really is twofold. Why is hydrogen not already part of the energy mix? And why is it going to be different for hydrogen this time? To answer the first one, the adoption has been happening over the years, but it's been a little bit slow simply because of the cost to produce it, store it, and transport it. Now, technology has come up with solutions where the cost to produce it has become much lower than it was historically, and the availability of the production allows it to be produced where it's actually needed. So I think hydrogen is now ready to be part of the energy mix. The tools and capabilities are there to do that. Now, the second question, why this time? And I think in the back of the availability of on-site production of hydrogen, we also have this enormous penetration of renewables, which happened at an unprecedented level over the last 5 or 6 years. The Philippines is in a fantastic opportunity to take advantage of renewables. Certainly solar PV, wind, hydro, possibly also geothermal are all energy sources that the cost point of which now has fallen quite significantly. I guess also climate change is a really big problem for the Philippines. I think the motivation to decarbonize the economy in the Philippines, that also has a big impact in terms of the timing for the adoption of hydrogen.
Mark, based on your experience, are there a lot of countries already integrating green hydrogen into their energy mix?
I think probably one of the countries that's leading this is Japan. It's got the most publicized and documented rollout plan for adoption of hydrogen in all aspects of society, ranging from household heating to cars and transportation. Yeah. But I think if you look at other countries as well, there's been a lot of announcements recently saying that they were going to stop diesel vehicles in their cities to reduce emissions. And I think the countries that are the most vocal in this are certainly Germany, France, South Korea, also China and the US in terms of the top 5 countries.
I think Germany in particular has been spearheading the commitment to hydrogen research and development for the past few years. How big a role will green hydrogen actually play in decarbonizing German industries?
Germany and other European countries, they're looking into a safe solution for future energy. What I see now is production of green hydrogen. I know some large project is going on in Helgoland. This is this German island. So I think German government investing also a lot of money into this. What I know, Helgoland should be or will be like a hub for green hydrogen storage. Production will be on the seaside, and then it will be first transported to Helgoland with a large storage harbor for green hydrogen, and from there maybe it will be shipped to Hamburg, Bremen, and some other harbors in Europe. So a lot of things going on there.
Germany basically decommissioned a lot of their nuclear power stations, I think, in the late 80s. And the emphasis at that time was to replace those not with more fossil fuel power stations, but with renewables. Germany has definitely seen the opportunity that hydrogen plays both as an energy store and as a source of power, and has certainly already put a lot of commitment into building the infrastructure, in particularly fuel cell refueling stations for cars. So at the moment, I think Germany has over 90 hydrogen refueling stations. And the investment in the infrastructure, I think, has been the key point here. In terms of the encouragement for the manufacturing of technology around this space, what's particularly close to my heart at the moment is the German government's involvement with the technology that we work with towards manufacturing. And the main electrolyzer component that is the heart of our system is going to be produced in a new €140 million production facility in northern Germany, which will basically be producing 2,100 megawatts of electrolyzer capability. And that is really Germany's part in providing the infrastructure and the technology to allow countries to build solutions around the hydrogen production side.
Are there any hydrogen-based pilot projects in the Philippines?
I think the early adopters of fuel cell technology has certainly been the telecom operators. If you take the combined use of diesel generators between the two telcos in the Philippines, that probably has a figure of maybe around 20,000 diesel generators. And for telecom operators, they're really concerned about profitability and dependence on diesel generators in terms of reliability, dependence on the price of diesel and the cost of logistics of delivering fuel to these remote sites has certainly been an attractive opportunity for fuel cells. Telecoms is an important utility to offer, and with the more frequent storms and situations that you get in the Philippines these days, a fuel cell can generally operate reliably under pretty extreme conditions. In addition to telecoms, we're starting to get a lot of interest from utility companies. So you have power providers who provide electricity, but there are literally some places that it's not cost effective for them to run high power cables to provide electricity in these sites. So the idea of using solar combined with hydrogen storage and power delivery, where the cost point and the reliability can guarantee you a price per kilowatt hour that would be lower than trying to do the same using diesel generators, is also very attractive. I guess the first sort of example of that would be the permaculture project that we're currently working on.
Robert, could you maybe explain a little bit more about this pilot project that Mark just mentioned regarding the Philippine Permaculture Association? What is that all about?
Basically, I think there is a very large potential for small hydrogen projects in the Philippines. If we think about remote farm sites or villages, resorts on beach sites or small islands, and the Philippines has more than 7,000 islands, so there's a large potential. We are working at the moment on a small project in cooperation with the Philippine Permaculture. This project called EBU. EBU stands for Electric Bamboo Bicycles. The project is off-grid farm site production facility for assembly and production of bamboo bicycles. The project configuration is a solar rooftop with electrolyzer, green hydrogen storage, and fuel cell to make the electricity again. The all-in-all carbon footprint of this whole facility will be nearly zero. If somebody in the future wants to visit this project site, it's not so far from Metro Manila. It's about 2 hours by car. If the project is implemented, so everybody is welcome to have a look.
Well, thank you, Robert, for that advance invitation to what will hopefully be a reference project site here in the future. We'll definitely follow up on that one. Based on your experience, both of you, what are the current hurdles for a greater adoption of green hydrogen and fuel cell technology in general, not just here maybe in the Philippines?
I guess the first hurdle, I think, is an educational one. I think the work that your organization is doing to educate the market, the key stakeholders, both in the policy side of the country and the users, is the first step. We basically need to get the message out and to have people understand what the value proposition is. I think the second hurdle is that it's perceived to be an expensive solution to get into. People will always compare a solution that we're providing, whether it's for a base station or a small village, to what the alternatives are. And if the alternatives at the moment are fossil fuel-based or batteries or whatever, they're going to look at the cost of the two. What historically we've been able to show is that fuel cell technology, capex-wise, the capital cost would be a little bit higher than buying the equivalent diesel generator battery type products, but the operating cost is considerably lower because in the example of diesel generators, no need for oil change, no need for servicing, no need for fuel. So if I take the capital cost and the operating cost, the fuel cell solution will end up being a cheaper solution over a period of time.
But apart from the education, what do you think would it take to fast track green hydrogen development and use here in the Philippines?
If you were to look at external help, maybe from the government or from policymakers, I guess there's a couple of recommendations that we could make, which we have seen been successful in other countries. I think the first, barrier is really the sort of thorny issue of import tax. The second area might be in the use of subsidies. Now, I'm not necessarily a big believer in subsidies because I think they can be abused, but certainly markets that are heavy users of imported oil or whatever that has a cost to the country. If we can switch people away from a diesel generator to use a hydrogen fuel cell, it's going to save money in form of subsidies that the governments may have to contribute to keep the price of that oil affordable to the users. But I don't think that money should be given to the user on day one. I think it should be given after they've demonstrated that they have used the technology for a number of years. I think that the third area that we should be trying to encourage is Philippine local development of technologies around this whole hydrogen production process. Hydrogen production is one thing, but the technology for storing and the IT skills, if you like, for optimizing the operation of a system where you have variables such as renewable. And I think in the Philippines, there's a lot of good IT type people there, both mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and programmers that can take advantage of knowing how to develop systems to better optimize the use of this technology in the field. And I guess finally, one way to promote this is to start specific pilot projects. Ideally, a pilot project should be something that demonstrates the application of the technology, but also has potential to be rolled out to many other sites.
Thank you for your insights on fast-tracking green hydrogen potentially here in the Philippines. And I especially like your comment on building the manpower to actually run and operate and maintain such facilities once they are in place, because that is obviously also a concern for people who want to invest. And of course, yes, we fully agree with the awareness raising and just showing what can be done with this technology. We here at GPCCI surely hope that we contribute to the awareness raising with activities like this podcast. And I am really excited about what the future holds in store for green hydrogen worldwide, but particularly here in the Philippines, of course. So thank you so much, Mark and Robert, for taking your time to speak to me today and to share your vast knowledge and experience on the topic.
Yeah, thank you also. This was a really pleasure to join this podcast.
Yes, we're happy to be here. Thanks to GPCCI for all the work you're doing in this area. And Palam.
I would also like to thank our listeners for tuning in today. If you have any questions about today's episode or any other GPCCI podcast, contact us at info@gpcci.org. We're happy to answer your questions.